What is neurodiversity?
What is it about these people?
Dyslexia,
autism spectrum,
ADHD,
Gifted,
dysgraphia.
All brains are different.
It's okay to be who you are.
This is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 113. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and we're going to talk tech today and about how we can help our kids understand and manage social media, video games, and everything in between. We're also excited to offer a free download for you to use with your kids from our guest's book, and that will be available on our episode page. So, at the end of this month, January 31st to be exact, my newest book will be out in the world. Raising Twice Exceptional Children, a handbook for parents of neurodivergent gifted kids, addresses all of the things that parents navigating the world of bright, neurodivergent kids need, from how to advocate for them in school to how to support the development of the skills that all twice exceptional kids need. Raising Twice Exceptional Children is available for pre-order right now on the Routledge Publishing website. That's ROUTLEDGE.com or through Barnes & Noble. You can also pre-order the ebook on Amazon, although there has been a hiccup with the ability to pre-order the paperback. But don't worry, the paperback should be in the warehouse and available to order by the release date of January 31st. Our guest today.
I'm Alex Packer. I'm an educator and psychologist and author of Slaying Digital Dragons, Tips and Tools for Protecting Your Body, Brain, Psyche, and Thumbs from the Digital Dark Side.
Don't go away.
Previously on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Today we'll be talking about dyslexia with Dr. Dan Peters.
It presents in gifted people. It can present in similar ways, which we'll talk about, but it's also hidden. Stealth dyslexics or gifted dyslexics, they often don't read out loud. They often read in a choppy, slow way. They either will actually skim through the page and bounce all around and then get the gist of it, which they're very good at, or they'll read very slowly and run out of time.
Yeah.
Dyslexics generally need to get hands-on. They need to talk it through. They need to understand the story. It's really about making things meaningful and contextual and removing the barriers.
That's episode 59. Look for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to the
Neurodiversity
podcast.
Today we're talking with educator and psychologist Dr. Alex Packer. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
My pleasure to be with you.
So I think that we can all agree that technology use has changed a lot in recent years. And the ways that kids are using their devices is uncharted territory. So tell me about some of the observations that you've made that really brought this topic to your awareness.
I have been increasingly concerned about the impact of living one's life through a screen on growing bodies and brains and social beings. I think kids are spending so much time on screens that it's affecting other areas of important development for them.
How long ago do you feel like you really started noticing some of those changes?
Well, I began to notice many of them just environmentally. You go into public spaces or you go to relatives or friends' houses and you see kids who are obsessed with their telephones. And the more I got concerned about that and the more I looked into studies and, my own experiences with the internet, the more I felt that we're really heading in a wrong direction.
It's been really interesting as things I feel like have changed so rapidly. I feel like the pandemic really accelerated some of those changes, but I'm sure you were working on this topic well before that as well. Do you feel like the pandemic has influenced this as well?
I think the pandemic has revealed a lot.
Yeah.
We have seen during the pandemic the miraculous aspects of the digital world. Being able to go to school and go to work remotely, being able to communicate with friends, to have Zoom parties. That world literally was saving lives during the past couple years. But at the same time, I think it revealed how different on-screen life is from what I call real life. Now, I don't think kids make that distinction between online life and real life. It's all one thing to them, and I think it's going to get even more tricky and possibly worse with the coming of the metaverse, even further obscuring that distinction. But I think kids realized during the pandemic how much they value their friends and face-to-face contact, and how a Zoom party just isn't the same thing as being together with their friends.
Yeah.
Even if they're still on their phones the whole time that they're together in a room with their friends.
Yes. I think one of the things that you point out is how important it is to help kids build a level of self-awareness, which I think is important in many aspects of their lives. But with technology use, I feel like it's difficult because everywhere kids look, all they see is everyone else using technology all of the time. When you're working with and talking to kids, is there a specific type of language or terminology that you use to help them build this kind of awareness and evaluate whether or not their technology use has become problematic?
Well, you've really hit on the central point of my work, which is to help kids, to empower them to take charge of their digital life. I mean, I think what happens for so many kids is they're simply born into screens. They're not making conscious decisions about how long to spend or which apps or what to do. It's a bit like, the frogs put in the pot of water on a stove and you turn up the heat. I think we're all brainwashed and indoctrinated to a certain extent. And by the time we're spending 6, 8, 10 hours a day on a screen, in many ways, it's too late. And the whole approach I take with kids and in the book is to show them how to take charge of their screen scene and to push back about big tech and to make sure that the time they're spending on screens is enhancing their life and not harming it in some way.
What do you think are some of the criteria that kids might use to help differentiate between the two?
I think it's important for them to consider the type of things they do online. I think adults tend to focus on how much time kids spend on screens. Some parents think it's too much time. Other parents think it's way too much time. I have yet to meet a parent who says, "Oh, I'm concerned my kid isn't spending enough time on a screen." Mm-hmm. So we tend to focus on the number of hours. And that's important. I mean, if you're spending 8 hours a day on a screen, even if you're doing fabulous things, that's 8 hours you're not doing something else. I think of kids who maybe practice a musical instrument 8 hours a day, or training to be a tennis player 8 hours a day. It may be a magnificent passion, but you also have to think about what aren't they doing. And the difference between, say, those interests and passions or obsessions and screen time is that wanting to be a musician or a ballet dancer, those are choices you make. It's your autonomy. Whereas for so many kids, the time they spend on screens isn't really a choice they've made. It's the result of platforms and business models that are trying to addict them, capture their eyeballs, and make them hostage to that particular social media platform or online activity.
Yeah, I know sometimes as a parent, I really end up feeling like a hypocrite because although I'm often asking my kids to get off of their screens, they see me on mine. And I know that I can justify what I'm doing because I'm doing something for work or I'm researching or reading. What are some ways that parents might be able to help their kids differentiate between what's an activity that might be on a screen that's of value versus one that is perhaps not?
Well, the first part of my book presents kids with 9 wacky challenges. They're science-based, research-based, but they ask kids to examine their screen scene. And parents can do that as well. Parents can understand those challenges and start a dialogue with their kids. For example, I present kids with a challenge where they see 20 warning signs that might indicate problematic use. So if in certain aspects of their life, whether it's psychological or social or cognitive or physical or relational, they can look and see, gee, do I do that? Does that apply to me? So that's one place to start, recognizing the warning signs, which of course might also be the result of something completely unrelated, but warning signs are a good place to start when examining your screen scene. Other things you can do is get a sense of how much time you are spending on different types of activities. Are you using a paint program on your computer or editing a film you've made, or are you, playing video games for 8 hours a day? How do these activities make you feel? How do you feel before you go to your social media pages? How do you feel after? Are you creating or consuming when you're online? Are you learning or vegetating? Are you active or passive? Are you connecting or isolating? Do you have a good balance between your online and offline lives? Are adults in your life yelling at you? Do you have conflicts with them about what you're doing on screens or how much time you're doing it? What are your triggers that put you online? Do you feel lonely, depressed, joyful, creative? It could be anything. So the more kids can understand that, I think the more awareness they have. And one thing I have learned is that kids are also concerned about this. I think they're a receptive audience for the message I put in the book.
You mentioned building that emotional awareness before kids hop online. And I think that's really important because I know I notice that it seems many of us have developed this automatic reflex that the minute we aren't fully engaged in something, that we check our phones or social media or start playing a game on our phones. And so there's something I think to be said there just about boredom. I know when I was a kid, and I complained to my parents that I was bored. The quote that they used to say to me was, "You're not bored, you're boring." Do you think that kids are losing something by not experiencing some of that boredom once in a while?
I do. I think boredom may be becoming extinct. And I think that's a very negative casualty of kids always having their devices at the ready. Over 90% of teens and young adults say that they use their phones to keep from being bored or to just pass time. And I think boredom it's like a garden for creativity. It's a gateway to daydreaming. I think we give kids the message often that they need to be spending every moment of the day studying, learning, being productive, getting better at something, pursuing something, taking lessons here and doing this activity there. And I think, no, I think it's really valuable to just have time when you're doing nothing. Even, if you're just staring at the light fixture above your bed. I'll never forget a teen once said to me, "If you don't daydream, you won't get anywhere in life." And I thought that was so profound
Yeah.
because daydreaming and boredom and those empty spaces that you need to fill, that's how you get to know yourself, how you feel your thoughts and hear your insides. And if you think about it, you can't get to know another person without asking questions and interacting with them. And in order to get to know yourself, you have to pose questions to yourself and listen to yourself. And I think so much of social media is dissolving one's sense of self, because for many kids, they're creating a brand when they're online. They're not reflecting their true self, and to a certain extent, they shouldn't. You need to be private and careful about what you put up there. But for many kids, posting instead of sharing their life has become their life. And they do things in order to get the selfie or in order to be able to put that post up online. And then, of course, they're enslaved by the 24/7 social report card they get from social media, where every minute of every day, did you get a like? Did somebody return your text? All these things, I think, are creating unhealthy expectations for kids. And for some kids, it's making them feel depressed or excluded or lonely or inferior in some way, that their life isn't as good as other people's lives.
Yeah, it's really hard to see. And it's hard for kids to extricate themselves from that. And on that note, I'm wondering, what can parents do to help regulate technology use? Because, I know for our family, really, once the pandemic hit, I felt like all boundaries for screen time kind of just went out the window because we were all just in survival mode. And now we're in the situation where we're having a hard time kind of reining that back in. So what advice do you have for parents about that?
It's tricky. I'll start there. It's really tricky. I think the first thing parents need to do is get their own head in the right place. And you touched on that earlier when you spoke about example. The most powerful teaching tool is example. So parents need to look at their own device use. Many parents of teenagers are more addicted to their devices than their teens. So that's a place to start. And be conscious of what you're modeling. If you're with your teen, give them your full attention. Put down your phone. As an aside, there is fascinating research that shows that the mere presence of a phone, even if it's off and not being used, that mere presence reduces empathy, recall, the quality of that human exchange. Another important thing is to start a dialogue. If parents take charge and they are the enforcement of how much time kids are spending on screens, that creates a power struggle. And it makes the parent responsible for the teen's digital well-being, doesn't make the teen responsible. So right then and there, I think it's important for parents, except in the most extreme cases, to step back from that enforcement role and instead create this partnership and have conversations with your kids about their screen use. Ask non-judgmental questions. Let them teach you. They always know more about that stuff than most adults do. Ask them what they enjoy the most about being online. What do they enjoy the least? What social media platforms do they use? How does it make them feel? If you've got reticent kids who, are barely more than a one-word answer, you can ask these questions in terms of their friends or their classmates, or ask them what they think about things in the news. There's barely a single news story these days that doesn't touch in one way or another on the digital world, whether it's misinformation, COVID, political issues and the election, the Facebook scandal with Instagram, all these things. So if you have that ongoing dialogue, I think you stand a much better chance for encouraging your children to question their own digital life, because you're raising the questions, have you ever wanted to unplug from your phone? Do you ever feel like your phone's controlling you, that you're its tool and it is not your tool? And you can see how those types of questions could lead to very helpful discussions.
It has built this trap, kind of. I have to check my notifications on Facebook. I have to check in and do my tasks on my video game or whatever it might be. It's really hard to break free of that.
And I make it real clear to kids, I am not holier than them. If I have my phone next to me and I hear a notification, I instantly pick up my phone. But I have learned, if I want to concentrate, to turn my phone off, to put it in another room. And I think it's really important to make kids aware of how intentionally big tech is manipulating them. 72% of teens agree. So I don't think that concept would be a shock to them, but I don't think they know the extent to which it's happening. I mean, for example, on YouTube, 70% of the time people spend on YouTube is viewing YouTube's recommendations. So you might go to YouTube to see a particular video you want to see, but once you're there, if you spend a few hours on YouTube, 70% of that time will be viewing what they're suggesting. And something, I think almost 100%, maybe 94% of 18 to 24-year-olds use YouTube. And YouTube has become the leading agent of radicalization in this country now. So if you think of those algorithms that are always feeding more and more emotionally arousing content, because that's what keeps your eyeballs on the site, content that angers you, that engages your emotions in some way, that confirms some conspiracy theory, that content spreads 6 times faster and deeper than happy, truthful content.
The boring stuff.
Yeah, the news story that 100,000 airplanes took off and landed safely today is not going to get you to click on it. But the one story about a plane crash will. And kids are being presented with emotional equivalents of plane crashes. Adults are being presented with that. And that is so toxic.
You mentioned the Facebook scandal with Instagram. And for those who aren't familiar with that, there was basically a leak of a bunch of documents that came out from Facebook that really showed many things. But one of them specifically was that they are aware of the negative impact of the mental health of their teen users, specifically girls using Instagram, and have kind of turned a blind eye to it. And I noticed that when I'm working with my clients, there are a lot of really interesting misconceptions. What are some of the other beliefs that you notice that a lot of young people have that might be incorrect about social media use?
I think many teens' beliefs are more incomplete than incorrect. The one that I will call out that I think is just absolutely incorrect is a lot of teens think they've become experts at multitasking. Like college students, every 19 seconds, they're switching back and forth from one task to another. And teens, if you've got teens and you watch how they're using their phones, they do this very same thing. And what they believe is that allows them to develop like some sort of skill of multitasking. And it is just the opposite. They're task switching. So instead of focusing on something for some period of time and learning how to concentrate and study and remember and solve problems. They're simply learning how to be distracted and unfocused. And because a lot of this is happening in the prefrontal cortex, where these higher functions take place, this assault of stimuli that's constantly, every few seconds, giving them this barrage, that is preventing the bulking up of the higher functions of your brain. So I think the belief that that isn't affecting them, that it's actually a skill they want to develop. And, of course, you can sing while taking a shower. You can eat popcorn while watching a movie. But that type of multitasking is only possible because they're such different activities. You can't study while talking to a friend. So I think that is one of the major misconceptions teens have, and it's an important one because it affects, if they are doing homework and over half of kids say that they are distracted by social media when doing homework, that's not leading them to not do social media. Many of them are thinking, oh, well, I can multitask like that.
I hear that day in and day out with my clients, and I just am like, that's not really how it works. I hate to tell you. I know that also a lot of your professional life has also dealt specifically with addiction. And so I'm curious how that applies to this topic. How can we tell when a habit related to technology use is spilling into that realm of addiction?
That's a great question. Addiction is a loaded term, and I try to avoid it, but my preferred definition of addiction is it's the psychological and or physical inability to stop compulsive behavior despite negative consequences. And I think that covers a lot of territory without getting into withdrawal symptoms and this and that, and can you really be addicted? I think the main way to assess whether someone is addicted to their devices is to think in terms of those warning signs and consequences. Does your use keep increasing? Are you using, and it's interesting that we talk about users online just as we talk about users for drugs and alcohol. It's an interesting double use of that term. Mm-hmm. But, do you go online even when it's against the rules or breaks the law or it's just plain rude? Have you tried to stop and been unable to? Are you continuing to use even though you're suffering bad consequences, your schoolwork is suffering, your parents are angry with you, your friends have said, why are you always on your phone? You don't pay any attention to me. And then emotionally, are you angry, irritable? If you can't be on your phone, are you experiencing stress? Are you constantly thinking of when you can get back on your phone? Are you euphoric when you're online, but depressed when you're not? Are you hiding your use? Do you lie about what you're doing online? And I could substitute alcohol or cocaine for being online and everything I just mentioned there, and it would apply equally. So I think looking at the consequences is the way you can get a sense of whether the use is healthy or problematic or really full-blown beyond the control of the person.
I want to mention also, one of the things I really enjoyed about your book was the number of resources that are available for kids. And one of them specifically, we're talking so much about helping kids build their awareness of what their habits are, what their patterns are. And there's one resource called What's Your Screen Scene, which is a tool to help kids kind of go through and evaluate it. Is that the same one you were mentioning earlier in the interview?
I didn't. That is part of the 9 challenges that kids can take, and they can score themselves, and then they can get a a real good sense of where their screen scene falls from super healthy to something that they might want to reset. And then if they do want to reset it, the whole book leads to a tool for doing that.
Yeah. And so I'm excited because you and I kind of chatted ahead of time, and we were able to get permission to have that resource available for our audience. And so if you're interested in accessing that, you can go to the show notes page and find a link to access that and have work through it with your teen. But I know we could talk about this topic all day, but as we wrap up, the last question I have for you is this. If you were talking to a parent who's just feeling really frustrated and overwhelmed and uncertain of what to do, and you wanted to give them one piece of encouragement about helping their teen set healthy boundaries around technology, what is the one thing that you would want them to hear?
Oh boy, you saw how long my book was. So reducing it to one thing, I think my publisher had wished I could have done more of that. But I think the most important thing parents can do is engage in a dialogue with their kids and encourage their kids to be mindful about their screen time and to be conscious about what they're doing and to take charge of their digital life. Don't let big tech take charge of it.
Dr. Alex Packer, author of Slaying Digital Dragons, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's been fun to be with you.
There are no hard and fast rules about digital usage in today's world, and how could there be? The landscape of that world is changing rapidly. Many neurodivergent kids and teens gravitate toward technology for a variety of reasons. Maybe because it sparks their passion or provides them with a different type of connection than they find with their peers at school. The ability to self-monitor and self-evaluate are important skills towards self-regulation. These 3 steps are what I often describe as the metacognitive cycle. And the healthy usage of technology can be fostered when kids explicitly go through those steps. Alex's excellent resource, What's Your Screen Scene?, is available to our audience so you can start this conversation today. Just go to the link in the show notes to download it for free. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Our thanks to Dr. Alex Packer. The evaluation resource he and Emily talked about is available on the episode 113 page at neurodiversitypodcast.com. Since we're talking about electronics, here's a flashback of our oldest son telling us what electronics use is really all about for him.
Really, it's all kind of about being away from the parents, if you know what I mean.
Our musicians for this episode were Ever Yearning and Melanie Bell. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. I'm the executive producer and post-production editor, Dave Morris. And for all of us here, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. This is a production of Morris Creative Services and the Neurodiversity Alliance.